I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me.
Guess what today is? And you probably don't know, and that's okay.
It's your birthday.
Yes,
It's your birthday.
is. How did you know that? I don't know your birthday.
Well, it's happening while I'm in Australia, so...
Wait, are you a Sagittarius?
No, absolutely not a Sagittarius.
My husband's a Sagittarius. Were you going to say apologies?
I'm a Scorpio.
You're a Scorpio like Somi.
The best interaction I had about being a Scorpio was long time ago, or decades ago. I was talking with a person, and they said, you know, what's your star sign? I said, I'm a Scorpio. And they said, oh, my ex is a Scorpio. And I said, yeah, everybody's ex is a Scorpio.
That is true. Although I'm not going to lie, all my favorite people are either Libras and Scorpios. I am a Libra, okay?
I don't know what that means. What are the qualities
I'm a
of a Libra?
cusper.
What does that mean?
It means that I'm like one of the more magical, mystical beings. You know, I like things in balance. I don't like conflict. You know, we're lovers, not haters,
Yeah, I see that.
as opposed to Scorpios.
Who are deceptive and
Yeah.
conniving and secretive.
Mhm. But still, some of my favorite people.
In the Dungeons and Dragons alignment grid.
Lost you again.
So, are you aware of the county of Worcestershire in England? England's
Faintly.
fair and pleasant land.
Faintly.
So, Worcestershire is kind of, if you imagine where Wales is, and Wales kind of sticks out from England, like a sort of belly.
Okay.
Where that belly kind of joins the main body, bang in the middle, that's Worcestershire. So it's kind of on the west of England, just east of the border with Wales. And in Worcestershire is a small town called Tenbury Wells. Tenbury Wells. What is the state of your English rural experience? I mean, you lived in the UK. Give me your impression. You imagine let's picture an English rural town nestled in the hills.
Yeah.
Population
Cute.
about 3,500. Describe what you're imagining there. What are you seeing in your head?
I'm seeing a little corner pub. I'm seeing cottages. I'm seeing rolling green hills, maybe a fence and some sheep and some little cars. Cute little cars.
Let me rephrase that. Cute, normal-sized cars
That's right.
for normal people in a normal country.
Not our behemoth monstrosities over here.
Weather-changing death traps that the US prefers. Yeah, that's pretty much Tenbury Wells, actually. Yeah, small, 3,500 people, small rural town. I'll give you a potted history of Tenbury Wells for you. So it was established in the Roman period, around AD 80, and that's because it sits, and this is important, at the crossing of the River Treme, which is a river that flows out of the Welsh hills, flowing east into England. And it was part of the route, historians think, where Romans reconquered northern Britain in around AD 80, so they probably set up an encampment there, and that became the basis of a town later at the crossing and the ford. It's first recorded in the Domesday Book of 1086. This is sort of this very famous record of a profile of England, if you like. It was a record of all the towns and villages and occupations and people. And at the time, in the Domesday Book, 1086, it was referred to as Temedderbury, which means fortified place on the Thames, the river.
That rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah. There is the ruins of a Norman castle. So obviously the Normans stole Britain.
Reconquered.
Yeah, I was about to say that was a massive faux pas. The Normans, Vikings who moved to France, then up to England, conquered Britain in 1066, and part of their conquest was setting up castles. That was their sort of innovation. So they built a castle there called Castle Tump. It's rather a disappointing castle.
Yeah. I mean, it's a disappointing name. Tump?
T-U-M-P.
Yeah.
Is basically a small mound now, which, you know, in the sort of lineage of British castles you can go and see today isn't super great, but there's a lot of those around. 49, there's a record of it as Tenbury for the first time when Henry III granted it a market charter. So it was allowed to set up a market and became a trading centre for the region. And interesting you mentioned sheep because it was a specialist in the wool trade. But in 1839, she enters her spa era, which is where she gets the name Wells from. So in 1839, a local doctor started to promote the healing power of a local spring, which was very much the fashion of the time. If you're in the early 19th century, there's a lot of spas going on.
Like bathhouses, you mean?
Yeah, or the idea that like natural water somehow
Fair.
has healing properties.
Natural hot springs.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Enormously popular with the sort of growing middle class and aristocracy of industrial Europe because of all the cities being poisoned with noxious fumes and all that stuff, and this growing medical understanding. So much like lots of towns in England and Britain that had natural springs, it tried to rebrand itself as this tourist destination. They changed the name in 1840 to Tenbury Wells. So Tenbury became Tenbury Wells in acknowledgement of the spas. And in 1862, they opened a really kind of interesting looking royal spa bars, which are in what the research told me was the well-known Chinese Gothic style.
I've never heard of that. And I went to architecture school.
It looks exactly what it sounds like. I'll put an image up on the screen. And so, like a lot of places as well, it, was getting railway running to it. So a railway opened to Tenbury Wells in 1861. And, everyone thought, great, this is going to be a huge boom. We're going to get loads of tourists coming from the cities to come and, spend their weekends in the spa. But actually, it didn't work. For whatever reason, they didn't attract the attention, and it sort of failed to grow and materialize as a new economic boom. The spa is still up. It's part now of a shopping arcade, and today Tenbury Wells, as I said, has a population of about 3,600 people. Again, unremarkable for a lot of rural areas. About a third of them are 65 plus, and like hundreds of towns, it doesn't really have a significant economic footprint. It's mostly there as a hub for the local community and a couple of commuters who maybe travel up to Birmingham. And as you described in your beautiful rendering of your imaginary of an English village, very picturesque, very beautiful, lots of boutique stores, lots of sort of nice boutique sort of clothes shops and design shops and bathroom outfitters and things like that. So in many ways, Tenbury Wells is slightly above mid. It's not quite mid, but it's slightly above mid. It's not particularly significant. So why do you think Tenbury Wells might be the most futuristic town in the UK?
Ooh, for a second there, I just thought you were telling me like a really nice little bedtime story.
I have given you a slight clue. You might have missed it.
There's something about the like mineral hot springs. Is this like the fountain of youth or something? I'm very off, aren't I? What did it have to do with the sheep? Not the sheep. Is it because of the 65-year-olds? No. Aren't they trying to solve an employment crisis? It's not about the river?
It is about the river.
I got it. I don't know what, but I got it. Okay.
Tenbury Wells may be the first UK town in modern history to be abandoned because of climate change.
Refugees of climate change?
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Tell me more.
So the area has always flooded. There's records and evidence of floods going back, as far as it's been there. And in fact, the Bath Spa, they knew about it in the 1830s because the Bath Spa was put uphill, intentionally designed to be put uphill to avoid when flooding occurred, to avoid it getting flooded.
Yeah.
It sits on the confluence of the River Team, which I already mentioned, and Kaya Brook, and is in a natural floodplain. And about 1,500 square kilometres of catchment from upriver drain into that floodplain. So it's very prone to flooding. But people have been living there for 2,000 years, right? So it's not news. It's not new flooding. It's, it has been going on for all that time, but there's been a massive increase in recent history. So in 1960 was the first real catastrophic flood. The entire town centre flooded. 1998 was another big significant flood. So lower parts of the town and the town centre flooded. 2000, there was severe flooding across the whole region. 2007, 2019, 2020, more severe floods taking out the town centre with massive damage. And now it's every year. 2021, 2022, 2023, multiple minor floods. In 2024, Storm Bert hit the UK. Now, according to eyewitnesses, they just said the entire town was flooded in minutes. It went from nothing to completely underwater in minutes. And we're not talking like, up to the rooftops. We're talking sort of up to waist height.
Yeah, but that's a significant amount of water damage.
Yeah, takes out businesses, takes out the high street, everything else. So being aware of this, the council started putting plans together in 2019 to put in flood defences. That's started around £7 million in cost, but over time has gone up to £30 million in cost due to the complexity of the problem, the increasing propensity of the town for flooding, and as a result of increasing climate change. And flooding is only projected now to increase. So it's projected those flood levels will be 20% higher in 10 years than they are now. So not only will it be more frequent, it'll also be more severe. And part of the problem, according to the local councillors, is that the money that goes towards flood defences is applied for in grants from central government, and the speed of central government at dispersing those grants can't keep up with the speed of how the climate is affecting the severity and propensity of flooding in the town. So yeah, those 2019 plans were 7 million. They've now spiraled into 30 million pounds. But the problem was that in the latest round of grant spending for flood resilience and flood prevention measures, Tenbury Wells was excluded. The government said, we're not going to fund your flood resilience. You can apply again in 2026, basically. So there's no help coming for Tenbury Wells until 2027 at the earliest. And as you can imagine, this has left the people of Tenbury Wells pretty deflated, right? Because public buildings in the town are now uninsurable. There are 3 public buildings in the town, including a cinema, which is a historical site of interest of some sort or another. It's an Art Deco cinema. They can't be insured. So if they flood again, they basically have to crowdsource or fundraise to pay for the repairs. And also now local businesses are starting to report that they can no longer get private insurance for their shops, loss of contents in stock or the closing of business hours or repairs to shop fronts and things like that. Here's a quote from Andrew Bright, who is the owner of an electrical shop called GE Bright, which he inherited in the 1980s from his dad. We haven't been able to get any flood insurance since 2020. We're moving out of the town centre. It's just not feasible to stay any longer with the floods. We've brought some land outside of Tenbury and are setting up a shop and a warehouse there. So businesses are already starting to flee the town centre. And of course, once that starts to happen, residents kind of, follow what's there left to do. Now, I did say, this is the first example in the modern age. You aware of Dunwich? No. It's a sort of very wind-beaten coastal town or it was a very wind-beaten coastal town on the east coast of the UK. And between the 13th and 19th century, the town was basically just gradually swallowed by coastal erosion. There's some amazing sort of photo series from the late 19th century of the church just gradually falling into the sea. The church just gets shorter and shorter and shorter as the back of it just drops off and the spire is left standing up at the front. And you can still see the spire under the waves today, There was a town called Hall Sands in Devon, which was abandoned in 1917 because, again, it was destroyed by coastal erosion. These are coastal erosion, so not necessarily climate change, but certainly, the earth swallowing bits of land. But for instance, the 1950s and 60s saw the abandonment en masse of lots of villages in southern Spain due to drought, which lots of people think was exacerbated by climate now. And more recently, have you seen the images, the videos that have been going around the last week or two from Boston, North Carolina?
No.
These are amazing. So these are homes in the well-known American state of North Carolina, built on a barrier island. So one of those thin islands that runs down the outside of the coast. And those barrier islands move. They move with the water. So these houses have gradually just been falling in, and apparently like 9 of them all fell in one weekend the other week. So I mean, this struck up a question because Tenbury Wells is not the first example of a town lost to climate change to be abandoned, but it is getting a lot of press attention because it raises the question of how do we deal with this problem that will be increasing, in the so-called developed world, in the Northern Hemisphere. We will start to see climate refugees on a small scale like this. And so there's a lot of variables that come sort of to the fore and come to attention when it's actually starting to happen, and how decisions are made and what is valued and what is good. And I guess that's what spurred me to think a little bit about how do we manage this inevitable decline, or do we do it, as with Tenbury Wells, in an unmanaged way?
I'm super interested in this, and I've been kind of following this since this documentary that came out called A Note's Ark. And it was about the island nation of Kiribati and the prime minister or the president. We need to figure this out. But basically, the leader of this...
His name is Anote Tong, and he was the former president.
It is. Yes, the president. Yes, thank you so much, Tobias. We have to maintain our accuracy here. We are good researchers. He was one of, I think, the first on a very, very public platform to go to the UN and plead for refugee status to be implemented towards refugees of climate change so that his citizens could seek asylum and go to other countries. And one of the conversations that was happening as part of this is like, if this island nation, this collection of islands is no longer habitable due to the impacts of climate change, and it's not just rising sea levels, right? It's the spread of disease. It's hotter hots and all of those things.
Too much salt in the ground.
Exactly. Yeah. All of those things impact quality of life and the feasibility of people to be able to kind of continue on in the ways that they live their lives in these places that allow them to thrive, not just merely survive. And so he really fought for the argument that like we need to seek asylum. We are also refugees due to conditions that are beyond our control. And I think at that time there was so much kind of publicity around this because it was one of the first instances of us really being confronted with this idea that like there will be refugees of climate change, and we do have to think about how our policy structures begin to support those refugees, right? And it's not just an issue of water, there's also an issue of like hot or hot. So we're seeing in places like Arizona, there are parts of these like very intensely desert landscapes that are becoming inhabitable.
I think you've hinted at sort of the questions I'm left with. And you mentioned Kiribati. So Kiribati, yeah, it's probably one of the most well-known examples in the world. It's about 130,000 people, so it's sizable. It's not the 3,500 of Tenbury Wells. Living over a vast area, 33 islands that cover an area larger than the entire area of India. Like, so it's a massive area. Most of it's about 2 meters above sea level and is predicted to be uninhabitable in the next 30 to 50 years. And so the former president, 2003 to 2060, Anote Tong, had this policy called migration with dignity. And so his thing was, we don't want to be stigmatized as refugees for whatever that tells us about society. And he famously said, we don't want to be seen as a people forced to migrate. We want to migrate with merit and dignity. So they're engaged in a program of like training people in Kiribati with the skills that might be needed in the places that they're migrating to, which is largely Australia and New Zealand. Tuvalu equally is very close to Kiribati in its moves. It has a thing called the Australia-Tuvalu Felapili Union, which was set up in November 2023 and allows 280 Tuvaluans per year to migrate to Australia. It was the first treaty in the world to explicitly acknowledge climate migration. And they've also got a New Zealand migration scheme that allows 75 people a year, which is, far short. There's 11,000 people in Tuvalu. So, it's decades before all those people would be able to immigrate. So massive waiting list. But also Tuvalu is probably quite well known, possibly to you and to listeners, for trying to set up a state in the metaverse in 2022. Do you remember the metaverse? Remember when that was?
I do remember that.
Interestingly, do you know what the big revenue generator for Tuvalu is?
Something to do with data.
Sort of. It's the .tv domain.
Wait, what?
So .tv, as in like,
Yeah.
Netflix.tv.
Yeah.
That's Tuvalu. That's the country code for Tuvalu.
So that's how they generate revenue?
It's not. I don't think it's how they
out?
generate revenue. But it's how it works. They are the government's own top-level domains of countries, and they sell them because TV companies want them all over the world. It's just a coincidence of naming them.
You know so many obscure facts. It's very impressive.
I know too many obscure facts.
Does it ever come to use besides like entertainment or like a party trick?
You know what? I like to think it does because it gives me perspective and helps me understand that nothing is new.
And everything has happened before.
Yeah. So those are good examples of like managed decline. And even then, they're not really managed. I mean, as you said, Kiribati and Tuvalu are incredibly vocal on the world stage, but it's still getting short shrift from the so-called developed world, right? They're not really getting the help they need, which in the scheme of the global economy is relatively little, which is something that I think is a big part of this picture, is it's throwing what we think is valuable and important into the mix, which is why Tenbury Wells is so important, which I'll come back to in a second. Because the second option is kind of unmanaged decline, right? So managed decline is Tuvalu, Kiribati, we're looking out 50 years and we're saying, we're going to start getting ready for this and we're going to work backwards to think about moving. But there are kind of really bleak stories of unmanaged decline. So another example actually in the UK, which got a lot less coverage, is a coastal former seaside resort of Fairbourne in northwest Wales, which in 2014, the city council announced they would stop maintaining flood defences in 2054. They just said it's not financially tenable. It's very small. Again, it's a population of 700 and it sits, again, in a highly water-prone area. So at the confluence of Cardigan Bay and a Welsh word I'm going to absolutely destroy, the Mordack Estuary. It's got a lot more letters in it than that.
Yes,
and
sure.
it, like a lot of seaside towns, was a big Victorian expansion, built from reclaimed land. So they pushed the land out to square off the bay and then built these sort of seaside homes there. Most of it's below sea level. And, by most standards, the first modern UK community to be deliberately decommissioned is the phrase that's being used. And of course, in some senses, that's quite a mature decision, but it was devastating for the community. Property values just plummeted overnight. So people are now trapped in homes they can't sell. They're also uninsurable because who's going to insure a home if the council have already said they're not going to protect it from floods? Residents there do describe themselves in big scare quotes as the first climate refugees of Britain. And unlike the people of Kiribati, there's no support for relocation. So not only are their assets now kind of worthless if they own their home, they also have no financial support from local or national government for relocation. pretty bleak for the people of Fairborn in northwest Wales. But Tenbury Wells, why does Tenbury Wells stick out to me as an example? It's because it's in limbo. It sits at this intersection of a couple of different things. For one, it is that picturesque local British village with a couple of protected buildings and a fort that goes back to the 1080s and a Roman heritage and coins and all that sort of stuff in it. The stuff that it's not uncommon, but it's still, a history that's there. So there's this question of like, how do you decide what's worth leaving behind and what's worth keeping? And I think Tenbury Wells is, as a result of politics and economics, at the crux of that limbo, right? Where I think a lot of the delays and the thinking and people, do we go, do we not go? Does the government step in, do we not step in? Is because really a decision is sort of culturally and socially being made about what's worth preserving. This is going to happen more and more. Tenbury Wells has no economic value. It's not a big city centre. It doesn't have a university. It doesn't have, a massive economic engine at its heart. So there's this problem about like, are we at a point now where we're starting to just have to acknowledge, look, these idyllic sort of pastoral, small c conservative views we have of places like England and Middle England, like Tenbury Wells, has to be let go. And that's just a really difficult thing for people to let go of.
I think the other thing that strikes me, even when you are talking about like how we assess value of whether something is worth saving, if we think about, let's like take a step back and look at like STEEP framework for a second, right? The social, technological, economic, ecological, and kind of like political lenses. The thing that strikes me is this is primarily an economic argument that's being made, right? It's no longer valuable to us from a capital perspective to be able to preserve these things. Where does the question of like the ecological piece come in, or the social piece? There are issues of maintaining or preserving culture and also biodiversity that are not necessarily being factored into this equation that maybe hopefully would in new policy structures. And I'm now going to bring in signals that you and I have seen over the last couple of years around like rivers having personhood, or, trees in certain jurisdictions, or like a forest or something in certain jurisdictions in like Canada being given some version of a right to vote in local elections, right? Primarily because of like, there's a way to assess the impact of climate on these living systems. So to me, it becomes really interesting if we say, okay, the financial aspect of this is, and I'm seeing your eyes glaze over, Tobias. Have I lost you?
I'm with you. I'm excited for a conclusion.
Let me get to my point. I don't think that's a sufficient formula. I don't think it's sufficient to just say it's about financial gain or financial loss, right? And when we think about where the world is headed, I think the formula needs to be so much more complex than, are we able to retain a viable economy? And if we're not, then we abandon. Because then how much is lost if that's how we're making decisions?
Yes, that's true. And I completely agree that it shouldn't just be reduced down to a number. I think that's also the hard fact of it. The UK is struggling economically and is, like everywhere, going to suffer more from climate. And you have to do some quid pro quo of like, is this ultimately really a worthwhile investment? There's no way they're making 30 million back in revenue to justify the cost of those flood defences as a town to give back to the government. And the argument is that history worth preserving? This 2,000 years of history. It's sort of at my most, I don't know, ataraxic, cynical, I don't know, but at my most tranquil, I would just say, yeah, let the pandas die, let the rivers flood. If that's what it takes to achieve equilibrium, to allow the thing to pass, with harming as few as possible, harming nobody, not harming as few as possible, harming nobody, then that should be done. And there's probably is a calculus being run somewhere of like, is it cheaper to relocate these people than it is to put up flood defences that will need repairing again in 50 years and again in 50 years and again in 50 years and so on and so forth. To the ecological piece, I haven't actually seen that sort of debate being had around what the ecological impacts of that flooding might be, but it's a natural floodplain. It's supposed to flood. It's supposed to absorb the excess water of the area. That's part of the ecology of the area, and it's artificially been held back since, the Victorian era.
And I want to be clear, like, I'm not advocating for the retention of the city kind of infrastructure. What I'm saying is it feels short-sighted to be primarily making the argument for whether or not something persists due to the economic conditions.
But I think this is the calculus that more and more places are going to face.
Yeah.
Tenbury Wells has never had to justify its existence in 2,000 years. So it's been there, it's been on the river, it's been big, it's been small, it's been famous, it hasn't been, but it's been there. Now it's literally facing an existential crisis, and the world in which it's facing an existential crisis is one that demands a return for investment,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's just, and that's going to be the quid pro quo for an increasing amount of places.
Can I tell you a short story, a super quick short story? Because I feel
I
like
would love that.
I mean, so when the fires were happening here, the really intense ones in January in Los Angeles, we called our insurance company because we wanted to re-up our fire insurance, right? And our insurance providers, and we called a few others actually also, and they were like, yeah, we are not able to, the service is not available at this time. And so it's so real. Like there's such a complex system. There's like policy, there's kind of like the business ecosystems that pop up around these things and are a little bit more predatory. There's the kind of the ecological aspect of it. And then there's the social and cultural aspect of it. All of those pieces are siloed at this time. So none of those folks are really talking to each other. They're just trying to figure out how to survive or capitalize on the system. And it's very real. And it's, we got to figure it out.
Very real.
Yeah.
A fair amount of, our research at least has indicated the insurance companies may be the tipping point. They may demand the government steps in, or else it's economic catastrophe.
Yeah.
Especially when you talk about public buildings being uninsurable. The three buildings in Tenbury Wells fine, but what happens when it's half of Westminster being uninsurable?
Yeah. Or half of Los Angeles.
Or half of Los Angeles.
You know
And also this is why this is, I know we're a transatlantic team, but this is why this story also sort of stuck a bit, is it's such an unusual confluence of quite a quaint pastoral, bucolic English countryside town of this type that I've seen dozens of, hundreds of maybe, with global systemic change happening over hundreds of years and 2,000 years of history, all in this one really small and in many ways kind of unremarkable place. And so that's why I think it caught my attention. This is a test case for this collective imagination that particularly British people have of like the bucolic English countryside again, throwing up against the reality of that countryside is now trying to swallow us.
Can I say bucolic is one of my favorite words?
Yeah, of course you can. Do you want to say it again?
Bucolic is one of my favorite words. And I don't know why.
I love that for you. Anyway, I mean, I guess we can reconvene in 2027 to find out what happens to the town of Tenbury Wells, whether they get their flood defences or relocate or are gradually swallowed by the River Team.
I mean, if we're still doing this pod in 2 more years, then maybe we have an update.
Yeah. I mean, live interview.
Yeah.
That's the real test. Forget Tenbury Wells. That's the real test. Can our friendship
we've been friends
survive
for like
this
what?
bullshit?
We've been friends for like over a decade. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
Since
so.
2012? Something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But we've never faced a challenge like this.
All right, my friend.
Look, lovely to talk to you. Keep your eyes on Tenbury Wells.
Same. Will do.
Ciao. Toodles.